Here's something engaging for your YouTube video introduction. A cold wind whistled through the city streets as an old man shuffled toward the bank's grand entrance. His clothes were tattered, his shoes barely holding together, and his unkempt beard made him look like he hadn't seen a warm bed in weeks. People walked past without a second glance, some even stepped away, as if afraid he'd ask for spare change. But what no one knew was that beneath the ragged layers and weary eyes, this man was no ordinary beggar. He was a billionaire. Michael Carter had built an empire from the ground up, turning a small business into a global powerhouse. He owned skyscrapers, flew in private jets, and dined with the world's elite. But something had been nagging at him for years, an unsettling thought that he couldn't shake. Were the people around him, the businesses he trusted, truly honest? Or did his wealth shape the way he was treated? That's when he decided to put his own bank to the ultimate test. With his face carefully disguised and his identity hidden, Michael stepped inside. The bank was pristine, its marble floors gleaming under the bright lights. Customers in sharp suits and designer dresses were met with warm smiles and respectful nods. But as Michael approached the counter, he noticed the sudden shift. The teller's expression turned stiff, her polite smile faltering. He cleared his throat and spoke softly. "Excuse me, I need to withdraw some money." The teller glanced at him, then at the security guards standing nearby. "Do you have an account with us, sir?" Her voice carried an edge of doubt. Michael nodded and slid a worn-out piece of paper across the counter. It held an account number, his account number. A personal one, separate from his businesses, the one he rarely used, but contained enough funds to buy the very building they were standing in. The teller barely glanced at it before shaking her head. "I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to ask you to step aside." Michael felt a twinge of something he hadn't experienced in years, helplessness. He watched as other customers were greeted with warm service, their requests handled with care, while he, in his current state, was being dismissed like he didn't belong. And then something happened that changed everything. Just as Michael was about to respond, the bank manager appeared. But instead of offering help, he gave a signal, one that sent two security guards walking straight toward him. What happened next would reveal the true nature of the bank and shock everyone involved. Michael's heartbeat quickened as the security guards closed in. He stayed calm, watching their movements, observing every reaction. This was exactly what he had come here to see. Would they treat him like any other customer, or had they already judged him based on his appearance? One of the guards, a tall man with a sharp gaze, stepped forward. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." His voice was firm, not aggressive, but there was no mistaking the authority behind it. Michael didn't move. He looked at the bank manager, a well-dressed man in his 40s with a nameplate that read *Daniel Whitmore*. He stood with his arms crossed, an impatient look on his face, as if waiting for the problem to be removed so he could get back to business. "I just need to access my account," Michael said, his voice steady. "I have money here." Whitmore exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Sir, we don't handle requests like this. If you don't have proper identification, I'm afraid we can't assist you." Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out an old, slightly worn ID card, one of his lesser-known personal ones. He slid it across the counter. The teller hesitated, then picked it up, her eyes darting between the card and his face. Something flickered in her expression, uncertainty. She glanced at the bank manager, silently asking what to do. Whitmore snatched the ID from her hand, barely looking at it. "This doesn't prove anything," he muttered. "Anyone could get their hands on an old card like this." He placed it back on the counter and motioned toward the guards. "Escort him out." The security guards stepped forward. Michael could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had expected hesitation, maybe even mild skepticism, but not this immediate rejection. It was clear now, his presence here wasn't just inconvenient to them, it was unwanted. As the guards reached for his arm, a voice cut through the tension. "Wait." Michael turned to see a young woman standing near one of the desks. She was wearing a bank uniform, a name tag pinned neatly to her blazer. Her dark eyes were filled with something Michael hadn't seen in the others: concern. "Maybe we should check the account first," she said carefully, her gaze shifting between Michael and the manager. "If he's telling the truth, we could be making a mistake." Whitmore's expression hardened. "That won't be necessary." "But," I said, "it won't be necessary." His voice was sharp, final. Michael studied the young woman. There was something about her, an honesty, a willingness to do the right thing. But would she stand up against her own boss? The tension in the room thickened. Michael knew one thing for sure: this was far from over. Michael could feel the weight of every stare in the room. Some customers glanced over, curious, but unwilling to get involved. Others pretended not to notice at all, focusing on their transactions as if this moment didn't exist. The guards were still waiting for the final word from Whitmore, their hands resting near their radios, ready to call for backup if needed. The young woman, whose name read *Rachel*, shifted uncomfortably. She glanced at the teller, then back at Whitmore. "If he has an account here, we should at least check," she insisted, her voice quieter now, but still firm. "It's standard procedure." Whitmore's jaw tightened. He gave Rachel a sharp look, the kind that warned her to stay in her place. "I make the decisions here," he said. Michael took a slow breath, watching everything unfold. Whitmore wasn't just dismissing him. He was doing it without even considering the possibility that he could be telling the truth. That was what bothered him the most. Not just the refusal, but the complete certainty that a man who looked like this couldn't have any real business here. Rachel hesitated, then took a step toward the computer. "It won't take more than a minute," she murmured, almost to herself, as if convincing herself it was the right thing to do. Whitmore slammed his hand down on the desk. "Enough," he snapped. "You are not authorized to question my decision." The room went still. Even the security guards looked uneasy. Michael studied Whitmore carefully. There was something in his reaction that didn't sit right. This wasn't just about company policy or security concerns. This was personal. Whitmore wanted Ken gone. And not just because he looked like he didn't belong. There was something else beneath the surface, something deeper. Rachel took a small step back, but Michael saw the conflict in her eyes. She knew this was wrong. A customer nearby, an older man in a tailored suit, shook his head in disapproval. Honestly, he muttered under his breath, "Can't believe they let people like this in here." Michael caught the words, felt the sting of them, but didn't react. Not yet. Then, something unexpected happened. A man in the far corner of the bank stood up. He had been sitting quietly, flipping through some documents, but now he tucked them under his arm and walked over. His presence was different from the others, calm but authoritative. He wasn't a customer, and he wasn't a bank employee. Michael recognized him instantly. He was one of his own executives. The man stopped just a few feet away, his eyes locking onto Michael's. There was a flicker of recognition, but he quickly masked it. He turned to Whitmore. "I couldn't help but overhear," he said smoothly. "Is there a problem?" Whitmore straightened. "Not at all, just handling a situation." The executive raised an eyebrow. "A situation?" He glanced at Michael, then back at Whitmore. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're about to remove a customer without verifying anything." Whitmore tensed. He hadn't expected someone like this to step in. "It's not your concern." The executive smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Actually, it is." He pulled a sleek black wallet from his pocket, flipping it open to reveal a badge. Not from law enforcement, but from corporate. "I'm here on behalf of our internal audit team." Michael stayed silent, letting it all unfold. Whitmore's face paled slightly, but he quickly covered it with a forced chuckle. "Ah, well, you see, we have certain protocols." The executive didn't let him finish. "Then let's follow them," he said coolly. "Let's check the account." Silence. Michael could almost hear Whitmore's mind racing. Rachel, sensing an opening, hesitated only for a second before typing into the system. The moment stretched, the tension thick in the air. Then she froze. Her eyes widened as she stared at the screen. Michael knew what she was seeing. And so did Whitmore. For the first time, real fear flickered in his eyes. Now, Michael just had to find out **y**. Rachel's fingers hovered over the keyboard as she stared at the screen. Her breath caught in her throat. She blinked, as if trying to make sure she was seeing correctly. But the numbers didn't change. The name on the account didn't change. This man, the one everyone dismissed, the one security was seconds away from dragging out, had an account balance that made her stomach drop. Whitmore saw it too. His face went rigid, his confident posture stiffening as reality set in. His eyes darted toward Michael, no longer looking at him as an inconvenience, but as something far more dangerous, someone who held power. The security guards exchanged uneasy glances. They could feel the shift in the room. The executive didn't react at first. He had already suspected who Michael was, but now he had proof. He turned back to Whitmore, watching him carefully. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice slow and deliberate. Whitmore opened his mouth, then closed it. He was scrambling for control, searching for a way out of this mess. He had spent the last 10 minutes treating Michael like a nobody, and now with a single glance at the account, he realized the full extent of his mistake. Michael finally spoke, his voice calm, but carrying an unmistakable weight. "Would you like to explain why you were so quick to throw me out?" Whitmore swallowed hard. His forehead glistened with a thin layer of sweat. "Sir, I didn't realize." Michael tilted his head slightly. Didn't realize what? His tone wasn't raised, but there was something in it that made the entire bank fall into silence. "That I had money here. That I belonged." He let the words settle in the air, watching as Whitmore struggled for an answer. Rachel sat frozen, her hands still resting on the keyboard. She knew now that she had been seconds away from witnessing something far worse. A man being denied basic service, humiliated, and forced out, not because of policy, but because of perception. The customers who had ignored the scene before were suddenly interested. Some leaned in, whispering among themselves. A few looked uncomfortable, realizing they had been part of the silent judgment. Michael let out a quiet sigh, then looked at Rachel. "Did you confirm the account?" She nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. It's in your name." He gave her a small nod of approval before turning back to Whitmore. "Then I'd like to proceed with my transaction." Whitmore's face burned red, but he had no choice. He gestured stiffly to the teller. "Go ahead," he muttered. But Michael wasn't finished. He stepped forward, closing the space between himself and Whitmore just enough that the conversation could be heard, but not interrupted. "Tell me something," he said, his voice still calm, but carrying a quiet intensity. Was this about policy, or was it personal? Whitmore's throat bobbed as he swallowed. His gaze flickered toward the executive, then back to Michael. The executive folded his arms. "That's a good question," he said smoothly. "Because it seems to me that this wasn't just an oversight. This was intentional." Michael watched Whitmore carefully. The panic was creeping into his features now. The polished, confident bank manager was unraveling. The room had turned against him. And Michael still didn't know **y**. He could feel it. There was something deeper at play here. Something more than just arrogance or poor judgment. So he decided to push further. "What exactly did you think was going to happen when you had me removed?" Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper but impossible to ignore. Whitmore didn't answer, but the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands clenched at his sides, Michael knew he was hiding something. The air in the bank felt heavier now. The tension had reached its peak. Michael had set out to test the integrity of his own institution. And now he was about to uncover something far bigger than he had ever expected. Rachel frowned. "But that doesn't make sense. If anything, his account barely gets touched." Michael nodded slowly. He had set this particular account up years ago, separate from his business dealings. It was a personal safety net, untouched except for a few occasional deposits. There was nothing unusual about it. Unless someone had a reason to make it seem unusual. He turned to the executive, who flagged it. The executive hesitated. It was signed off under Whitmore's credentials. Rachel gasped. Michael stayed silent, absorbing the information. He had come here expecting to expose bias. But this wasn't just about poor treatment. This was deliberate asterisk. Whitmore hadn't just judged him by appearance. He had been waiting for Michael to show up. Michael's mind raced, piecing together the puzzle. Someone inside the bank had been watching his account. Someone had wanted it locked, inaccessible, and Whitmore, for whatever reason, had played along. Rachel swallowed hard. "Sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I think this is bigger than we thought." Michael nodded, his jaw tightening. He had come here looking for answers. But now he had uncovered something far worse. Michael let the weight of the moment settle over him. His name on the flagged list, the manual lock placed by Whitmore. This wasn't just discrimination or poor judgment. This was an intentional act, and whoever was behind it wasn't expecting him to uncover it. He turned to the executive. "Pull the full report," he said. The executive hesitated, then nodded. His fingers moved swiftly over the keyboard, pulling up a detailed log of actions taken against Michael's account. Rachel leaned in, her eyes scanning the screen, and then she froze. "This wasn't just flagged," she whispered. "Someone tried to initiate a withdrawal." Michael's stomach tightened. "What?" She pointed at a line in the report. 3 days ago, a request was made to transfer a significant amount out of your account." Her voice grew more urgent. It was blocked because of security protocols. But if that flag hadn't been there... She trailed off, eyes wide. Michael's mind worked fast. Someone inside the bank had been trying to steal from him. But instead of making the transaction, the system had locked. The executive's phone buzzed, and he checked the screen. His lips pressed into a thin line. "Security is on their way," he said quietly to Michael. Michael nodded. Whitmore let out a long breath. "It's bigger than just me," he murmured, almost to himself. Michael studied him. "Then I suggest you start talking." Whitmore didn't reply right away, but Michael could see it, the fight draining from him, the realization that he had lost. He wasn't the mastermind here. He was just another piece in the puzzle. And now the people behind him were about to be exposed. Whitmore stood there for a long moment, the weight of his decisions pressing down on him. He knew there was no escaping this now. The truth was out, and as the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the hallway, he let out a slow breath, his shoulders slumping. "I'll tell them everything," he finally said, his voice quiet but steady. "I don't want to go down for this alone." Michael nodded, his expression unreadable. That would be wise. Security arrived within seconds, stepping into the room with an air of authority. The executive motioned toward Whitmore. "Escort him to the compliance office. We'll be launching a full internal investigation." Whitmore didn't resist. He simply nodded, casting one last look at Michael before turning to follow the guards. As he walked away, Rachel let out a shaky breath. "I can't believe this," she murmured. All this time, and no one knew what was happening right under their noses. Michael gave her a small nod. "Corruption hides in plain sight," he said, "but it always leaves a trail." The executive turned to Michael. "We'll be digging deeper into the flagged accounts. If Whitmore was involved in this, there's a good chance there are others." He hesitated, then added, "You being here today changed everything." Michael let that sink in. What had started as a simple test of integrity had uncovered something far worse than he had expected. But in the end, the truth had come to light. Rachel managed a small smile. "I guess not all tests are easy." Michael chuckled. No, they're not, but they're necessary. As he left the bank, the sun felt a little warmer on his face. He had walked in as a nobody, dismissed and ignored. But now, the people inside knew the truth, not just about him, but about the cracks hidden beneath the surface. Some would be held accountable, others would learn a lesson, but one thing was certain. Integrity wasn't just a word, it was a test, and today, the bank had been forced to face it.